Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today, it's Friday, so we're talking Baltimore Ravens, Minnesota Vikings. That'll be the primary emphasis on this show. We'll also do the usual with the injury report recap, do a little Friday frenzy action, and then finish up with our picks for the week, as well as some Twitter takes. So, we got a lot to do today, so we'll jump right into it. But first, a word from our sponsor here. Coming out to Blackstack Brewing from 12 to 4 tomorrow for the second beer pong tournament of the season. Winning team takes home bragging rights and free beer for a year. Yep, that's free beer for a year. That's not hyperbole, folks. Get your tickets now at beerpong.twincities.directory, brought to you by the Twin Cities Directory. Discover the real Twin Cities and sign up today. And to be clear, that is Saturday the 21st. So if you're listening to this on Friday, the day that we're recording, that would mean tomorrow. But anyways, let's jump right into some Vikings football stuff here. Starting off with the injury report. There's a lot of names on both teams that have been limited or listed on the report just at all. I know I didn't count them up, but it looks like about 20 names between the two teams, and
probably more than that, actually.
Honestly, so Drew, why don't you give me the run through on the Vikings injury report? That's because we're gonna have to talk about Baltimore's too, because I think that's really such a big key to this game or this matchup this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, for the Vikings, I think it's Michael Floyd, Stephon Diggs, Nick Easton, and Sam Bradford, the four guys that have not practiced all week up until Friday. I'm kind of refreshing things right now just to see if we get any updates as to who. It looks like Easton is not practicing on Friday, or Bradford as well. Obviously, he hasn't been in Minnesota all week from what I know. So it looks like neither of them will play, and you'll get Jeremiah Searles in there at left guard again. Michael Floyd is probably going to be a questionable, and then Diggs, I would assume, is going to sit out. It sounds like I would assume that they sit him out until after the bye week. So that's basically the main injuries to look at. I think everybody else is more of a precautionary thing for either limited practice or just listed on the injury report. But
the big one that you brought up, though, is that Anthony Barr has cleared concussion protocol.
Right.
He also has an ankle injury this week as well. Obviously, that's probably not nearly as big of a issue for him as straight up passing concussion protocol and getting his brain healthier again. But it sounds like he's going to play this week, so that's good news. Emmanuel Lemur, for what it's worth, did fill in admirably, though, and I actually wouldn't have hated the idea of Lemur stepping in for Barr again based off of his performance last week.
Yeah, he was definitely a lot better than I expected, or any of us really expected for Lemur, because he's usually been kind of coverage has not been his forte, and nothing
has really been his forte.
That's true. That's true. But then for Baltimore, they got so many guys, at least on Thursday, that did not practice.
Unreal.
Just to make it, to do this quickly here, I'll just list off the names. Receiver Brashad Perriman has not practiced all week, concussion. Offensive lineman Matt Skura, not practiced all week due to a knee. Jimmy Smith, Achilles, their starting outside corner, probably their best cornerback on the outside.
One of the better cornerbacks in the league, too. He's a top 20 cornerback, probably.
Yeah, their top two tight ends, Ben Watson and Max Williams, the Gopher.
U of M represent.
Neither has practiced this week. Terrence West, running back, has not practiced this week. Tim Williams, I believe he's the rookie linebacker.
I really liked him out of Alabama.
Yeah, he has not practiced this week. And let's see, Mike Wallace did not practice Thursday.
I wanted to see him play.
He's their leading receiver at 239 yards, which is 66 in the league. And then Ladarius Webb also did not practice Thursday, and he's been their slot cornerback all year, and he has not done very well in the slot because he's giving up the most yards per route run against him in the slot, which is where Adam Thielen will be on Sunday. So please, I would recommend starting him in your fantasy lineups. But that's where we have for injuries. Any takeaways?
The major takeaway here is that Baltimore is doing everything they can to even the playing field in terms of injuries.
And then
some. Honestly, this is one of the most overall injured teams that I've seen. Like the most total starters being out or expected to be out.
Or at least beat up.
Yeah, or beat up, yeah. So, not having Stephon Diggs, I'm with you on that. I don't think he'll be in there as well. That'll hurt the Vikings, but against this team, it's kind of a one-for-one sacrifice if Jimmy Smith is out as well. Because, like I was saying when Drew was listing the injury report, he's by far their best cornerback. Yeah. He's not a bad cornerback. He has been an elite cornerback in the past. So he's an important player on their defense. Ladarius Webb is also – it's interesting that he's played so poorly this year because he's, in the past, has been a very good cornerback and also played safety for him as well. The big thing for me is that Brandon Williams, their nose tackle, is in the game, though. He's a tone setter for their lineup. Very important player. He's a plugger. He's like Linval Joseph, and they need to have him on that defense, especially with so many other primary guys out. Since we're already kind of getting into it right now, let's just jump right into the Baltimore Ravens breakdown here. The first question I have for you is Joe Flacco elite?
No, he's not. He's far from elite. He had one elite postseason, and then that's kind of what has defined his career and made him over $100 million or whatever that contract was. But, in his defense, his weapons that he's had at his disposal over his career for the most part have not been great, and that will not change this Sunday. Mike Wallace will be his top receiver.
If he plays.
If he plays. And then his second receiver will be a guy named Chris Moore, and their slot guy will be Michael Campanaro, another person that exists. So you have three receivers
oh, no, that's not a former Viking. Campanaro's not a former. Who is the former Miami Dolphins wide receiver that played?
Greg Camarillo.
That
was like 7 years ago.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how old that guy is. I haven't heard of Michael Campanaro before.
Yeah, well, so we haven't heard of these receivers before, and frankly, they don't seem super impressive, and
they do have
look at the film. So
they do have Chris Matthews, who had that highlight reel catch in the Super Bowl last year in Seattle. He was an okay player. Jeremy Maclin is in Baltimore. I believe he's hurt as well.
He's hurt. He's been limited the both last couple of days, so he might play, but he's not listed as a probable starter at this point yet.
And then Brashad Perryman I believe he's in his third year now, and he has been an ultra bust. Since shooting up draft boards with that 4.25 40, he has done absolutely nothing to merit that first round pick. And then, like you said, Joe Flacco has been basically atrocious this year, at least.
Oh, he's on pace for one of the most historically awful seasons by a starting quarterback in recent memory. I'm going to look up his official numbers, but it's really astonishing the lack. I mean, it's been worse than Christian Ponder. I mean, that's how bad it's been as far as. Remember that game in London against the Jags? He literally finished the game with 28 yards and 2 picks the entire game. And I'm pretty sure he played up until the fourth quarter. So, yeah.
Joe Flacco has definitely been struggling this year. On the flip side to that, what does make him dangerous, though, is he throws a nice deep ball. That's why Mike Wallace probably ended up in Baltimore. That's always been what Joe Flacco has done best. It's literally kind of the only thing that really defines him as an elite quarterback, in my opinion. It's the one thing that he does at a very, very high level, and it hasn't been there for him much this year.
Yeah.
I believe Mike Wallace had like a 60-yard touchdown week 1, but in general, Joe Flacco has been a major disappointment this year. The defense is improving, but like you said, there's not very many playmakers on this offense at all.
No.
Like, at all, across the board. I mean, if you look at the running back position, too, you already talked about the wide receivers a little bit. With exception to Mike Wallace and Jeremy Maclin, who are basically name recognition at this point.
I mean, you get Terrence West in there, but he's hurt. It doesn't look like he'll play. So basically you're riding with, Buck Allen?
Buck Allen, Alex Collins, and then Bobby Rainey, the former Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And all three of those guys, in my opinion, Alex Collins has the most potential to be a quality running back.
Play.
Buck Allen, or Javorius Allen, as his birth certificate says, is a solid player. He's all right. He's young. He could still get better, but none of these guys scare me in the least. I don't think there's their offensive line isn't strong enough at this point either to block very well, give Joe Flacco the time in the pocket to throw the ball downfield. I mean, obviously, Ronnie Stanley is a very good player. Coming out of Notre Dame, I believe he's the number 8 overall pick a couple years back, or something
something like that. 6 or 8, something like that.
6. I think it was actually 6. 6 sounds right to me. I really liked him coming out of Notre Dame, and he's been very good since he's entered the league. But the rest of their offensive line is it's not great. honestly, you look at this offense, and just as a whole, I see very few playmakers. That includes both healthy guys and unhealthy guys. This offensive roster composition is just not great at all.
Would you say the Packers' offense without Rodgers is better than this offense as it stands right now? Because I would say so.
I would say so too. Yeah, I mean, Joe Flacco is more established.
Let's look at Flacco's numbers here, because
let's do that.
For the season, in 6 games, he started 6 games. He has completed 62% of his passes, which, that's fine. But he has 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns, 8 interceptions in 6 games. His adjusted yards per attempt is 5.4.
Ew.
Adjusted yards per attempt 3.9. Net yards per attempt 4.68. 3.26 adjusted net yards per attempt. And his passer rating is 66.
Yeah, so he's struggling, to say the least.
Yes.
And there's no one to bail him out, basically across the board on offense.
Exactly. So the situation is not great, and it's reflecting on his numbers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how does this affect the Vikings now? Well, they're coming into this game, basically on a similar role to the one they were on to the begin last season. Defense is playing very, very good. Over the past couple weeks, it's been 3 turnovers per week, basically. They've been doing a heck of a job forcing turnovers, winning the turnover battle just in general. Mm-hmm. I know that's a favorite cliche of all coaches. We got to win the turnover battle. But, yeah, that actually is pretty right. That's a fair takeaway by every coach that's ever said that. And just overall, they're stuffing the run well, tackling better. Eric Kendricks last week, much better tackling, as we expected, I should say. And just overall, I mean, if the weakest link is Trey Waynes, and he probably is, I would say, on this defense right now. Maybe Terrence Newman, to be honest with you. He hasn't been good either. But if one of those 2 guys is your weakest link, you should be looking pretty good against this team. Because basically, what I'm seeing from this offense and what I've seen on film and on paper is if you don't get beat over the top, this offense isn't going to beat you. There's just not enough talent to beat you with yak, missed tackles, that type of thing. Cutback runs, something that we talk about the Vikings struggle with. There's no good cutback runner on this team. There's no really elusive player on this team, honestly. Like, Brashad Perryman can run a 9 with the best of them, but that's all he can do. Same could be said for Mike Wallace. I mean, we saw him in Minnesota. We know what he can do and what he can't do. I don't know, man. I don't want to be too far down because then it'll end up, looking bad. Or sound like I'm biased, but I just don't see it with this Ravens offense.
No, yeah, I don't either. I mean, it's just the playmakers that Flacco's going to have to work with are going to be guys that, the Vikings have probably never heard of, and you're probably going to get Rhodes against Mike Wallace just because that's probably their biggest threat. But then you're going to, unless Macklin plays, but it doesn't look like it's likely. So I imagine that 20 or 21 point benchmark that the Vikings offense kind of typically has to hit in games will decrease by a few points, just because it's fair to expect the Ravens to wind up with less than 20 points, given the past few games.
15, I would say.
The Lions put up 14. The Bears put up, 8 or 9? If you mean there was the safety and then the special team touchdown. I mean, they couldn't put up points. The Packers last week put up 10. Was it before that? Tampa Bay put up 17. Before that, it was the Steelers who had a bunch of points gifted to them, and then you had the Saints who had garbage time points. So, I mean, there's no indication that a good offense can score 20 points regularly against this defense. Right. What makes me think that our Ravens defense or Ravens offense with no weapons and Joe Flacco at quarterback could, nothing. So I like the Vikings defense overall in pretty much every facet of the head-to-head matchups this week.
Yeah, offensively, this is just not. They're in a drought. Baltimore has a problem offensively. For what it's worth, they have started the rebuild well, in my opinion, with getting fortifying pieces like Ronnie Stanley. That's a guy that will probably be a very high quality, if not elite, blindside protector for virtually his entire career. He's going to be he's the type of guy that what we expected from Matt Khalil, that's what the Ravens should be expecting from Ronnie Stanley, in my opinion. He's that good of an offensive tackle. So Everson Griffin will have a fun guy to go up against one-on-one. I still favor Everson Griffin based on experience, the level of play he's performing at. I believe it's 6 straight games with a sack for him now, going for 7 in a row to start the season. Extremely impressive from him. So with the exception to Ronnie Stanley, though, I'm with you, man. I just... You look at the tight end position, and Max Williams is probably the only guy there that kind of presents a mismatch, in my opinion, and he's injured. So you look at the receiver position. They're number 1 and they're number 2, which honestly, Macklin and Wallace right now, not very good receivers anymore. But they both are limited, or at least being kind of hampered by some sort of lingering injury. So. And Brashad Perryman, too. So that's your 3 top receivers. Terrence West is going to be out probably, too. You're going with, I think Alex Collins is a second-year or third-year player at running back. I just don't see it against this Vikings defense. And, again, I don't want to be too overconfident because that always comes off wrong and it always seems to backfire in Vikings fans' faces. But, I mean, objectively speaking, this is not a good offense, and there's no reason to believe they're going to get any better.
Right, yeah. And I think... in this particular game, I don't really expect. I mean, it would be very surprising. Let's say this: it'd be very surprising if the Ravens were able to reach that 20-point benchmark, and if they did so, it would probably because of the aid of a special teams and/or defensive touchdown, which the Vikings were able to do so much last year in their hot start. But this offense, man, it's just so limited. There's nothing there. The offensive line's pretty average. Joe Flacco's not good, except for very few kind of fine points of the quarterback position. So many injuries, and the Vikings are relatively healthy in comparison. The offense has to have a very average game. The Vikings offense has to have a very average game for the Vikings to win today or on Sunday.
And then you look at even the IR list for the Ravens, that extends their injury report even further. So guys like Marshall Yanda, who has been arguably the best guard in the NFL for at least 5 years, if not longer, in my opinion, he's out. He's on IR. So you don't have to go up against him. Linval Joseph probably loves the idea of that. You've got guys like Danny Woodhead and Kenneth Dixon. Danny Woodhead is the most slippery back of all time, other than like Darren Sproles. He's a guy that can create missed tackles and kind of force mismatches just because he's so small. He's like Tariq Cohen in a way. And him being out is a huge loss as well. And then Kenneth Dixon, who they kind of expected to come in and be their bell cow back, he's out. So, I feel for the Ravens. I do. Like, this is a completely decimated roster. And with exception to the fact that they've been extremely good on special teams, I think across the board they're close to a number 1 ranking. That's no shock because John Harbaugh obviously is a former special teams coordinator. But this offense is bad, straight up. This is a bad offense, and it's clouded with a ton of veterans who are eroding like fast. So I don't see much potential from this offense. I don't see a way that the Vikings lose that phase of the game. Their defense versus this offense, I see no chance for them to lose the game. Now, offensively speaking for the Vikings, so flipping over to the Ravens defense now, you look at this team, and again, there's a couple of major key pieces that have been limited at practice or are going to be out in this game, guys like Jimmy Smith, guys like, I believe, I saw C.J. Mosley was on the injury report, the middle linebacker. And then you've also seen Brandon Williams, who is a full participant in practice. Like I said before, it's a big get for him to be in this game. But he has been limited as well this week. So you've got one key guy at each level, at the very least, limited. So this defense it's stout. Like there's a lot of good building pieces on this defense as they kind of get away from the Terrell Suggs era. But at the same time, it's still rebuilding. And the offense could beat this team.
Yeah, I mean, this secondary is like, a phenomenal 2013 secondary. You have Jimmy Smith, who I think was just kind of blossoming in the league at that point. Ladarius Webb was a ball hawking safety out there. Brandon Carr was one of the league's top corners. Eric Weddle was probably a top 3 safety in the league at that time. You have if you want to add Terrell Suggs too, when he was in his prime, was also lethal on the pass rush there off the edge. So this defense it's kind of like its offense, where it's just full of veterans who have been around and are kind of past their prime, kind of waning, and they get to play against a Vikings team that is full of rather young players that are still kind of on the up and up, where you have Jerick McKinnon at running back, you have Adam Thielen in the slot, you have if Stephon Diggs is able to play. We don't know a confirmation on that yet, but does not look good. But there's a bunch of younger players that are kind of still reaching potential. Obviously, Laquan Treadwell being one. You have a rookie starting center in there with Pat Elflein. This game, the Ravens will have to find a tremendous fountain of youth somewhere hidden at US Bank Stadium to have a chance in this game, because the Vikings are more talented, they are younger, they are quicker, they are faster on both sides of the ball. And the one thing that Baltimore has is some experience, but they're dealing with injuries too. It's just the Vikings have been able to be effective despite rather inconsistent play from Case Keenum. And, even if he continues that, they have enough weapons on the outside to match up. Again, I'll read off this number from Ladarius Webb, where he's leading the league in yards per route allowed in the slot. And Adam Thielen is one of the most efficient slot receivers in the league. So right there is a matchup the Vikings should heavily go after. And I think they should take advantage of it, and I think they will.
Yeah. You look at this defense, and there are a ton of great building blocks from this most recent draft class. You look at guys like Chris Wormley. That's a player that could be very good coming out of Michigan. We both liked him back in April. Tim Williams was one of my absolute favorite pass rushers. I think that he is a good player to kind of take over for Terrell Suggs as he sort of continues to hit the twilight age of his career. Tyus Bowser as well, another linebacker. I think he's actually been pretty solid this year for the Ravens, and he was impressive on film as well, coming from a smaller school. And then Marlon Humphrey, the rookie cornerback, was one. I believe he was either my number 1 or number 2 cornerback. I really liked him. I thought he was an absolute mirror at Alabama. So I think that he could be a very important piece as well. So they've got a ton of young talent defensively, but this is a team that they still need to have the gel phase defensively. A lot of these guys still need to get more experience and just more reps, honestly, and just being more involved in the defense before they can kind of get together and be a strong unit moving forward. On the back end, you look at guys like Tony Jefferson and Eric Weddle, 2 very good safeties. That's a very solid safety combination. And then, as Drew said before, a couple years ago, this is a great-looking defense. But right now, it's a mix of former playmakers and soon-to-be playmakers, in my opinion.
Yeah, you don't have kind of that star in the prime of their career that has proven themselves a little bit, kind of like an Anthony Barr or an Eric Kendricks or even a Harrison Smith, someone that's kind of in the prime of their career and proved themselves. There's not really that player on this Ravens defense. You could argue Jimmy Smith is probably the one guy that matches that kind of characteristic, but he might not play on Sunday.
Brandon Williams as well. Those are those are your 2 guys. Those are your foundational pieces right now. Obviously, Terrell Suggs has been great for a very long time, but to expect elite play from him at this stage in his career is just unfair. I think that Brandon Williams is probably the most important piece of this defense, and kind of between him and Eric Weddle, who has not played well this year, but virtually every year of his career he has been a good player. So you kind of have to expect that he'll sort of regress to the mean a little bit, meaning he'll get better as the season goes on. And so Brandon Williams and Eric Weddle are the 2 guys for me that could be an issue for Case Keenum, because Brandon Williams coming up the middle creates good pressure, and then on the back end, Eric Weddle is as good as anyone at being a ball-hawking safety. So I like those 2 players on this defense, but with exception to Jimmy Smith, as we said before, very good player, kind of not – he's sort of fallen off since he hit his peak a couple of years back. It's just this team is – in my opinion, this team is a rebuilding team that hasn't admitted it to themselves yet. Right, because they kind of screwed themselves over by giving Joe Flacco all that money and just messing up their salary cap situation, where it was difficult for them to bring in free agents. It was difficult for them to extend their own guys. Guys like Kmar Aiken, for example, their top receiver 2 years ago or 1 year ago, weren't able to re-sign him despite having absolutely nothing at wide receiver. It's just stuff like that. This team is a rebuilding squad that either hasn't admitted to themselves or just is still trying to win despite that fact. And I don't blame them. I mean, you always try to win football games, but this team honestly would probably benefit from losing more the rest of this year and getting some better picks to rebuild this roster and try to contend in the future, as opposed to trying to win their division right now. This is just a decimated team by injury that also lacks a ton of roster talent. It's not a very complete roster at this point in the franchise's history.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at their schedule here. They beat the Bengals week 1, not really proven to be a good team. They beat the defeated Browns week 2. Then they went on the road while they went to London week 3, got blasted by Jacksonville. Then they got beat by Pittsburgh at home, which you know how I feel about Pittsburgh. Despite their winning against the Chiefs, I still kind of am not quite on board with the Steelers. Then they beat the Raiders without Derek Carr. And then they lost at home to the Chicago Bears. So not super impressive looking at the schedule. Their strength of schedule has been pretty weak, and they find themselves at 500. It's this is the end of the kind of the competitive era of the Baltimore Ravens. I think we're kind of slowly starting to see that, and we're definitely starting to see the waning portion of the Joe Flacco career.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll finish up this breakdown here. Why don't you give me 2 players, one from each side of the ball, that you're particularly afraid of that could be a difference maker on this team. If you want to go into special teams as well, you can, just because Justin Tucker might be the best kicker. He might end up being the best kicker of all time if he continues at the pace that he's playing, because last year was arguably the best kicking season ever. He's extremely impressive, and then their punting situation with Sam Koch is okay, and they do a good job returning the football as well. John Harbaugh he's a special teams genius. They better have good special teams, but overall, give me 2 players that you see being kind of threats to the Vikings winning this football game.
Yeah, I'll go C.J. Mosley for one. I think as at that linebacker position in that 3-4 look, he'll basically be tasked in coverage anyway with either the safety valve, whether it be Kyle Rudolph, whether it be another tight end, or whether it be Jerick McKinnon, and he'll be tasked with sniffing out screens, which the Vikings have, they've really liked to kind of use those quite a bit the last few weeks here. Pat Shurmur has been getting creative in designing plays. The touchdown last week against the Packers was a really, really good play design. And he had 3 guys, motion and go deep down the left side of the field to draw the man coverage over there, wide open on the other side of the field. Things like that, you have to have a linebacker that can stiff that out, and I think Mosley's that guy. So watch for him. Offensively, man, I guess I'm going to point to an offensive lineman here, and that's just going to be Ronnie Stanley. I like that matchup with Everson Griffin. Will be something to watch because Griffin has he has a sack in every game this year, but I think Stanley's one of his tougher tests of the season, so he might be able to limit Griffin to some degree. But again, I think at some point you can't contain Everson Griffin for all 60 minutes. So
I would agree with virtually everything you just said. Just to kind of add some more information here. Offensively, I'll pick a wide receiver, and the reason why I'm gonna go with Rashad Perryman or Mike Wallace, whichever one of them is the number 1 receiver for them.
Whichever one of them plays.
Yeah, essentially. And here's why. I explained this a little bit earlier, but I think the only way that the Ravens beat the Vikings is if they beat Trey Waynes over the top and are able to get 6 points quick. And Rashad Perryman and Mike Wallace, for all their deficiencies in route running, they definitely can run the vertical route as well as anyone. And those 2 guys, even at this stage in his career, Mike Wallace can still burn. Rashad Perryman is arguably the fastest guy in the NFL. So, those 2 guys for me kind of mesh in their offense and make it as dangerous as this offense can possibly be. So that's their greatest threat in my opinion offensively. And then defensively, I'm going to stick with Brandon Williams. I've been talking about him the entire show here. Mm-hmm. So this is a guy that honestly, Arif Hassan kind of turned me on to him just by talking about him a ton and just being very adamant about him being a good nose tackle. And so I went back and watched the film over the last 3 weeks or so of Brandon Williams in preparation for this game. And man, this guy he looks a lot like Linval Joseph. He really does. So if you think of the amount of impact that Linval Joseph has on a football game, that it may not show up on the box score, but if you think about just watch Linval Joseph for a full 60 minutes and see the type of impact that he has in terms of keep limiting coverage time, just pushing around offensive linemen, beating them up, just literally making them not want to play anymore. That's the type of player that Linval Joseph is, and in my opinion, Brandon Williams is very similar in that regard. So he's a defensive wrecking ball, and he's a guy that is a big threat to what Case Keenum and Jerick McKinnon tried to do with the football. So I would say he's probably their biggest playmaker, and the guy that I think could really screw up this game for the Vikings in a big way if he comes out with an elite type performance as we've seen him do in the past. So those are the 4 guys, I guess the 3 guys for me and the 2 guys for Drew that are probably the most dangerous players in this lineup. I just want to throw out Eric Weddle one more time just because he is scary. He's like the white Ed Reed kind of. You know what I'm saying? He's a very good ball hawking safety that has always done his job as well as anyone. And because he was playing in San Diego for all those years, really didn't get the recognition that I feel he deserves. So those are, I guess, 6 guys to keep an eye on. So let's jump into a little Friday Frenzy action now. Across the league, we've talked about parity for the last couple weeks, so maybe let's try to get a little bit away from that subject. But just in general, what are you seeing from the NFL? I guess entering, I believe it's week 7 now. What are you seeing? What's shaping up to you? What's pissing you off? What do you like?
Can I talk about the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah.
And how they are the 5-0 team this year, because it's now we've had 2 years in a row now where a 5-0 team finishes the season at 8-8. The Falcons did it in 2015. Vikings did it last year. Chiefs are on their way after 2 straight losses now, and I mean that's just probably a coincidence as far as that stat goes, but it did seem kind of almost like an anomaly the way how efficient this offense was and how well Alex Smith was playing and how efficient he was passing down the field. It seems like teams have kind of figured that out now and are making the Chiefs beat them differently and kind of testing their defense a little bit as well. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you the Chiefs will finish 8-8, but it does look like that 5-0 start was a bit of an anomaly and they really aren't that good, which then kind of says that there really isn't an elite team in the AFC right now. New England, I guess, is by default still, but outside of that, I don't think
nobody's
Pittsburgh
proving
is,
it. No elite team is proving to be elite.
Right,
so
Kansas
far.
City was proving it for 5 weeks. They're not. Pittsburgh isn't there yet. I don't think. And I don't want to keep going back to parity, but I mean, there isn't an elite team in the AFC right now.
Yeah. You look at the Chiefs. I actually have another point that I want to bring up as well. But looking at the Chiefs, I think this is a fun topic because they were playing astronomically well on offense, right? Kind of like how the Vikings were playing astronomically well on defense last year.
Yeah.
Kareem Hunt has still a very good running back, but sort of kind of regressed to a normal level of play, not being absurd every single week, Yeah. You see that happen. Alex Smith, we've seen him play for long enough that we know that he was not as good as he was performing initially. We just know that it's not a sustainable pace for Alex Smith.
Yeah.
We've seen that from him. So I'm with you on this take that they're definitely a candidate to be the next 5-0 team to blow it. I'm with you that in saying that I'm not projecting that they will, but they have the sort of sniff, right? They played ridiculous football for 5 weeks, and I think this says something about sample size as well, that maybe we should probably be looking a little bit longer than 5 weeks to gauge a sample size.
That's the nature of the NFL, too. It's such a small – there's only 16 games, so your sample size is inherently small when you're trying to measure these things. But, yeah, I just think that the Chiefs they never really were as good as 5-0, and it does help, too, that I think the AFC is mostly bad, but I don't know. It seems like they could be a team that – not that they'll finish 8-8, or not that they'll miss the playoffs, but they will be challenged for that division, I think.
Yeah, that's fine with me. And Oakland looks a lot better now, obviously coming off of the win. I mean, they're our good team.
Carr's back, and he looks good, and they got that win. I mean,
Denver's still a good football team, too. I mean, that's a tough division as is. So we'll see what happens with the Chiefs. But I want to talk about the Raiders a little bit, specifically Amari Cooper, because he comes out yesterday and shut everyone up. Right? I have said bad things about Amari Cooper over the last 5 weeks. Virtually every fantasy owner in the world has had negative statements to make about Amari Cooper over the last 5 weeks. And what does he do? 19 targets. He got open 19 times in Derek Carr's opinion. 19 times. And he caught the ball a ton. He was making explosive plays downfield. He was being Amari Cooper that we all know and love from Alabama. The guy that runs efficient routes, that can explode and off of a missed tackle. Extremely lethal and dangerous player on all areas of the field. And he did that all against a very, very good Kansas City Chiefs defense. So, is Amari Cooper back? I mean, I don't know. We just talked about sample size. This is one game. We'll see what happens moving forward. But I do commend him for sort of having that mental stability to have all of that noise in his ear and still come out with arguably the best game of his entire career. And especially when the Oakland Raiders really needed him to come out and play his best, he did it. So props to Amari Cooper. Props to not just the performance, but also fading out the noise and just being the player we all know he can be, despite, the recent string of, just to be honest with you, awful football from him. So good for Amari Cooper, good for the Raiders, and probably bad for the Chiefs. So we'll see. This might be a fun narrative to keep an eye on moving forward, as the Oakland Raiders kind of shoot up a little bit and the Kansas City Chiefs kind of regress a little bit. We'll see which one of those two teams. Those are kind of the two favorites, in my opinion, to win the AFC West. So we'll see what happens with them. Oakland, for what it's worth, was considered one of those teams heading into the postseason last year before Derek Carr got hurt as a potential, Super Bowl candidate and a potentially elite team. So
could overthrow a New England type team, kind of end their era. That's a team to watch moving forward, in my opinion, if Amari Cooper can stay on track and Derek Carr can stay healthy, obviously. And that defense has to play a little bit better than it did even yesterday. But just in general, that's a good team. I like them moving forward. So with that, let's get into our picks for the week here. Can I announce our record? I'm gonna announce our records now.
Yeah, you could do that.
I'm 52-36 on the seseason. BJ is 41-47. So we have a sizable difference. BJ's got quite the deficit to make up. So I think I'm the smarter picker.
Yeah.
Trust me when we do these picks.
If you say so. All right.
You know I went 5-8 last week, but that's not important.
That's true, and both of us obviously did not start off well either. Kansas City at Oakland last night, both of us expected Kansas City to win that football game. Oakland obviously comes out with a W, so we're starting off 0-1. Leading off with the Baltimore game at Minnesota. Give me a score for this one as well, per standard. Who you got in this game, and what do you think?
I got the Vikings at 24, Ravens 9 in this game. I
like that. That's good.
It's this is there's a clear unbalance here, and the Ravens they're cooked, they're hurt, and the Vikings are they're somewhat injured, but they have the depth, they have the pieces, they have still a ton of talent that's healthy. They're the better team, and their defense is on fire. Vikings 24, Ravens 9.
I'm not going to deviate too far from what you just said. I mean, we just did a whole show breaking down the Ravens' deficiencies and all the matchups the Vikings should win. So I'm going to say the Vikings win 23-6. I think Justin Tucker is the best player on the Ravens football team right now. He's going to get all 6 of their points, and the Vikings are going to play well defensively. In Case Keenum is going to do just enough once again to win this football game and continue playing elite backup quarterback football.
Yes.
Moving on to the next game here, Tampa Bay at Buffalo. Kind of a fun one because Tampa Bay has been up and down this year with Jameis Winston going out with that AC injury. And then Buffalo has been kind of an interesting team, playing a lot better than a lot of people thought.
Yeah, I'll take Buffalo here. I'm not very confident about it, but I'll take Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm with you there as well. The reason for me is Jameis Winston being out and Buffalo's playing at home. So that's my reasoning, and that's all the advantage Buffalo needs to beat this sort of injured Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. Moving on here to Carolina at Chicago. Could be a fun one because Chicago is obviously playing better football now, even if it is sort of a weird offense. I wouldn't recommend running Jordan Howard 36 times every week, but and Carolina is obviously playing very well as well. You see Cam Newton came off a 3-game stretch of maybe his best of his career, kind of had a down game to some degree last week at Soldier Field. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't like Soldier Field turf for Cam Newton and the Panthers.
I don't either. I was just going to say that
but
too.
I think the Panthers win ugly here, something like 17-14 or 16-13, something like that. I think they pull it out, but because I think the Panthers' defense is still a bit kind of underrated, and I think they'll give Trubisky some trouble, and they'll force him to throw a little bit more instead of, I think they'll stop the run with Howard and not allow him to run 36 times. So I'll take the Panthers, but in a close one.
I'm gonna take the Panthers as well. It's not that I don't think that Chicago can win this game, but I just think Carolina is the better football team. And since we're trying to make the correct pick every week, obviously I've been failing to do so. But when you look at this game, how do you not pick Carolina just on paper? So that's why I'm picking the Panthers. I will say though about the turf thing that you just brought up. They've got a lot of skill players in Carolina that use that stretch their knees extensively trying to make plays. So be careful, Christian McCaffrey, this week because that Soldier Field turf. Curtis Samuel, Cam Newton, their quarterback. Just watch out, guys. I don't want to see this team decimated by Soldier Field. That sucks. Just keep an eye on that too because I think that's an interesting thing too. They got to fix that. Soldier Field needs some. They need to get fixed there. On to the next one here, Tennessee at Cleveland. Marcus Mariota, obviously, coming off of a pretty gutty performance. One of the better games that he's played, at least as a pocket passer in his career, in my opinion. And Cleveland is bringing back DeShone Kizer. Kevin Hogan was dreadful last week. Who you got?
I got the Browns this week. I think that Titans secondary needs some help still. And I think Kizer will kind of have – I don't know if a coming out party is the right word, but I think he kind of has one of probably his best rookie performance so far, and they edged the Titans in this one.
I'm going to take Tennessee. I am willing to admit at this point though that maybe Tennessee was a year away. I thought at the beginning of the year, if you remember.
Oh yeah, I was all in on Tennessee too at the time.
And I'm starting to look at this team a little bit, and I think there are a couple of major flaws away from being a very, very good team. And what sucks about that is that DeMarco Murray is entering the twilight of his career as well, obviously. And while you get to hand the reins over to Derrick Henry, which is one hell of a switch, but you've seen how dominant that two-back system can be.
Yeah.
So if Tennessee can get good real quick before DeMarco Murray kind of falls off, it's a dangerous team. But right now, I just don't think they're all the way there yet. I still got them beating Cleveland, though, because Cleveland is nowhere near being there. On to the next one here. This is a fun one. A fun one for Vikings fans especially. New Orleans at Green Bay. So at Lambeau Field, 9 times out of 10, this pick is going to Green Bay. But because of what went down last week with Aaron Rodgers, I don't know, man. Is Drew Brees a candidate to upset
I'm picking the
Saints?
Brett Hundley needs to show me something before I'm picking the Packers to win any games this year. So I'm going with Drew Brees.
Yeah, I'm picking Drew Brees too. I mean, the Saints have not been as bad as people thought they were going to be. I believe they're 3-2.
They're in the playoffs right now.
Yeah,
this is very early, and there's so many teams clogged up there. But yeah,
they've been solid this year. So I think a solid team could beat a team that's it's not just Aaron Rodgers that's out with injuries. So I expect New Orleans to get the W here. On to the next one, Jacksonville at Indianapolis. This is a fun game for people that like the AFC South. I don't think many people do. Generally speaking, this is probably one of the worst divisions in football in terms of watching value. But this game could be fun because Jacksonville is starting to come into its own, especially defensively. Indianapolis we're starting to see a bit of an end of an era. Obviously, when Andrew Luck comes back, that might change, but Indianapolis has dominated all these teams for so long, and now it seems like Houston is creeping up on them. And now Jacksonville as well. Who do you got in this football game?
I got Jacksonville. They are the 2012 Minnesota Vikings. I'm going to keep saying that because it seems like their method of winning is the exact same. Get some, a solid defensive play, some turnovers, and then rely on your workhorse running back, and your quarterback can throw under 100 yards and still win the game. That's what the Jags are going to do. The Colts are still without Andrew Luck. I think to me this is a pretty easy pick.
Yeah, this is Indianapolis is the worst roster in football without Andrew Luck on there. So I've got Jacksonville as well. Moving on to the next one here, Arizona at Los Angeles Rams. Should be a fun one in the NFC West.
I got the Cardinals. It just seems like that trio of Palmer, Fitzgerald, Peterson found something last week, and I'm banking on it continuing this week. I don't really have any real evidence for that to support, that it will, but I'll pick the Cardinals just for that. Just for fun, I guess.
I feel like I've been picking the Los Angeles Rams virtually every week this year. And I'm going to continue to do so this week just because I think they're one of the more complete teams in football right now, honestly. Like on paper, you look at what they're able to accomplish, how Jared Goff has, elevated his play to, either average to above average quarterback play. Todd Gurley's getting it done. We expect this defense to get better as the season goes on. I love Sean McVay. I'm picking him to get this W here. On to the next one here. New York Jets at Miami Dolphins. Real barn burner for sure. Who you got?
I got the Dolphins. They just pulled off a win at Atlanta. They're feeling themselves right now, and I still don't think the Jets are very good, despite what their record says. I think they're 3-3, but I'll go with the Dolphins at home.
I am going to pick the New York Jets, and I think this is a first for me this year. Probably one of the reasons why my record isn't very good. The Jets have played pretty well. Credit to Todd Bowles where credit is due. I mean, this is not a good team. They're playing a lot better than a lot of people thought. They actually contended with New England last week. So I'm going to pick the Jets. I think Miami is a faker. This is a team that if Jay Cutler can't turn it on, and we haven't seen him turn it on yet, they're not good enough to win many football games. So I've got the New York Jets. I guess that would be an upset. So I got the Jets pulling the upset there. Next one here. Dallas at San Francisco. When will San Francisco get its first win?
Not this week. I was thinking about it, but then I remembered that Ezekiel Elliott is going to play this week, and that whole suspension fiasco is waiting at least, until after this game. So I'll stick with the Cowboys.
Yeah, I am going to stick with the Cowboys as well. I don't think there's much explanation needed there. San Francisco is just a transitional roster that I expect.
They're also starting C.J. Beathard now, so
I expect Kyle Shanahan to turn this team around at some point. It's just not going to be this year. No, I Dallas for sure, no doubt. That would be a good pick for your if you're still in your eliminator league. I think Dallas is a good pick. Yeah. Next one here, Seattle at the New York Giants. Coming off of a good.
This is a weird one.
Yeah, this is a couple of teams that can't block. They both play good defense, and quarterback play has been meh, and running back play has been not what they expected, probably worse on both ends. So, Seattle or New York, Eli Manning, Russell Wilson, who do you got?
I'm picking, the way you characterized it was that they're very similar teams, but I think I'm picking the Seahawks just simply because they have the edge of quarterback. And that's really my only, I think, Russell Wilson can do better with what he has than Eli Manning can do with what he has. So
Seattle also has a receiving core that was with them in training camp. So I'm going to pick Seattle as well. I do think New York is a lot better than their record says. So I think they're a good team to be annoying down the stretch. So if you play,
they'll spoil for some teams.
Spoiler, yeah, I can see them being a good spoiler, but not this week. Seattle's a very good football team, a much better version of the New York Giants, in my opinion. Next one here, rivalry matchup, Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. Couple of interesting football teams. Cincinnati has came on as of late. Andy Dalton is showing more than he did early in the season, I guess.
Bad. Yeah, he's still bad.
And then Pittsburgh obviously struggling with Ben Roethlisberger contemplating retirement. Le'Veon Bell not getting the football as much as he probably should be. Who do you got in this football game?
I got Pittsburgh. Andy Dalton's still bad. Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown remain the top two playmakers in the league. If you have two on the same team, regardless of what's around you, you're going to be able to put up some points. I got the Steelers.
Yeah, I got the Steelers as well. I still expect them to turn it on eventually. I don't buy into the rumors that Ben Roethlisberger is dead. I think that he just needs one.
He's not as alive as he was.
I agree with that, but I think he needs one big football game to up his confidence again, and he's got the playmakers to do that for sure. And Le'Veon Bell, man, it seems like he's finally starting to get that surge going. He played very well last week. I can see him playing very well again this week and just sort of taking off from there into that. I could see him being, the NFL's leading rusher. I believe he's number 3 in the league entering this week. So I expect a big game from him and the Steelers as well. Next one here, Denver at the Los Angeles Chargers or San Diego Chargers, whichever one you prefer. Who you got in this football game?
I'll take Denver. I'm just always forever skeptical of the Chargers. So that's kind of what plays into part of this. But I still think Denver's defense is kind of there, and and I still think Phillip Rivers is he'll make that turnover or two he always does against this Broncos defense. So give me the Broncos.
I'm going to pick the Chargers because I think this is one of those fluky games they can win. Trevor Siemian, I believe, is hurt, and the rest of the quarterbacks on that roster are not good at all, in my opinion. So I can see Phillip Rivers finding a way to finagle a win here that maybe the Chargers don't deserve in front of the crowd of about 4,000 people. So I've got the Chargers getting the W here. On to the next one here. This is a Super Bowl rematch. Should be a really fun game despite the fact that neither of these teams have been playing to sort of their peak this year. Atlanta at New England. Who you got in this football game?
I got the Patriots. They're at home, and I can't imagine they're going to keep losing or at least, having close games at home the way they have this year. But yeah, both teams are kind of disappointing in comparison to what their expectations were, which is a little weird. But yeah, I got the Patriots, and that's simply because I trust them more, to be quite honest. That's really the only reason I am picking them.
That's fair. I think this game could definitely go either way. I'm taking Atlanta strictly because I think that New England's defense has not been very good this year, and Atlanta's offense has continued to kind of chug along. And we've talked in the past about how that offense has sort of been able to mitigate the loss of losing Kyle Shanahan to San Francisco. Steve Sarkisian has done a pretty good job calling plays. Real test against New England and Bill Belichick, but I've got Atlanta winning. And then we'll finish up on Monday night with another very good matchup. Honestly, this is a great slate of games this weekend for the most part. Washington at Philadelphia on a Monday night. That's an NFC East game that could be a defining factor down the stretch. Who you got in this football game?
I got the Eagles. The Redskins their defense is improving, but it's not enough for me to kind of for them to slow down this Eagles offense. Their offensive line is really good. They got Zach Ertz has been really, really good this year.
Yep.
Nelson Aguilar is now turning up and turning into a good receiver. And Carson Wentz is playing. I have to give him credit. I've been skeptical of him, but he's playing really well too. So I got the Eagles here, and I think it's going to be a rather high scoring game. I think the Redskins will be able to put up some points on this Eagles defense, but it'll be something 30s to 20s, something like that.
I'm with you on this. I've got Philadelphia winning as well for basically all the reasons you just listed. I think Philadelphia is the better football team right now. They're playing at home. That's the logical pick in my opinion. So that's it for picks on the week. Let's finish up with some Twitter takes now, and that'll be the end of the show. So what do we got, Drew?
Yeah, we got a couple of questions. They're not really pertaining to this game in particular, but they're kind of more about the entire season and where the Vikings are. Adam West, A West E1, asked us about Jaleel Johnson. How does he get snaps, and does he fit into the rotation at all? He mentions that Tom Johnson's playing well, and Shamar Steffen's in there too. Is there a way to get, because Jaleel Johnson did make a bunch of plays in preseason, is there a way to get him in there, or is it better to just kind of leave the rotation as it is?
Okay, so the Vikings have an elite situation on their defensive line. Anytime that this is a problem, trying to find snaps for a rookie player that you kind of expect to be good down the line at some point, that's a good situation. In my opinion, this is how Jaleel Johnson gets snaps, and it's not exactly fair to him, but this is the nature of the cutthroat NFL. Someone needs to start playing bad. Otherwise, he's not getting
somebody
any
gets hurt.
Or someone gets hurt, yeah. So, that's honestly how he gets in his rookie year, in my opinion. I don't see any other way.
You can't take away a job to somebody that's not doing something to lose it,
Right. I mean, think about how the Vikings slow played Danielle Hunter, despite virtually all of us knowing that Danielle Hunter was better than Brian Robinson last season. I think even Mike Zimmer even knew that he was the superior player.
Oh, yeah.
But Robinson was playing fine. You don't just take that job away from him if you can find, snaps to get in your other good players. And that's, I can see Jaleel Johnson when he's active, which this is interesting to me too, because when you make a guy like J-Ron Curse inactive in order to play Jaleel Johnson, you lose a special teams player. So
right.
It's difficult in Jaleel Johnson's spot right now to find any snaps at all. I kind of expect him to be inactive for the majority of the season. And that's not because I doubt his talent. It's just I think the defensive line is playing so well, and he adds no special teams value. So, in my opinion, someone needs to get hurt, or Tom Johnson needs to start showing his age a little bit. That's how he gets on the field.
Yeah, I agree. Last question from Eli at Schoolsees. He's asking us about who the most impactful player on the Vikings defense is and who has the real shot at defensive player of the year on the defense.
While there are probably three really good
There's
candidates.
three candidates for defensive player of the year, I think.
And that's Everson Griffin, Xavier Rhodes, and Harrison Smith.
Yeah.
Obviously. Anthony Barr has been very good. He's not in the defensive player of the year conversation, though. All of these players are very, very good within their role. The reason why I'm going to go with Harrison Smith is because his role is larger than everyone else's. Xavier Rhodes might have the most impact within his role because he is arguably the best cornerback. But at the same time, Harrison Smith is arguably the best safety. But what Xavier Rhodes is asked to do versus what Harrison Smith is asked to do, I simply think that Harrison Smith is asked to do more, and that gives him more playmaking ability, which allows for him to be a better candidate within this Defensive Player of the Year conversation. Everson Griffin has a shot because he plays really good run defense as well, on top of getting all these sacks. So if he can get to 18 sacks this year and continue to play as well as he has on run defense, he's a very strong candidate as well. And obviously Xavier Rhodes doesn't allow receptions anymore. So, honestly, all three of these guys are in the conversation at this point in the season. I completely agree with that.
I would throw in
Harris
into the impactful category just because of what he does to run.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. He's just I don't see a nose tackle ever winning.
No, I know.
Right.
I'm separating the impactful from the defensive player of the year.
Yeah. I agree with you there.
I mean, and I don't think Harrison Smith will be in that defensive player of the year conversation just because
think so?
It's the name, it's the stats. Like he might unless he does.
But he's getting interceptions right now. He's got 3 of them. Unless he
continues his interception pace, then it's a different story. But last year he had 0, and he was still a very good player. So
one thing I will say on that though is Harrison Smith has played very, very well on primetime matchups
True.
where everyone can see him play. Those are arguably his 2 best games of the year, against Chicago and then New Orleans. Right? I think those are the 2 games.
Well, he had the pick against the Packers last week too,
and that one too. Yeah, so he's had some of his best games on primetime. So people are starting. I think people, if they're not already, they should be. But I think people are starting to recognize Harrison Smith a little bit more. So I can see him being in that deep defensive player of the year conversation, similarly to how Eric Weddle has been in the past, where it's like there are other candidates that might be stronger. Guys like Von Miller always seem to be the stronger candidate, regardless of what their rap sheet actually looks like. But Harrison Smith is the greatest playmaker on the Vikings defense. Probably the most impactful player. That's not a word, by the way. Impactful is not a word. I didn't know that, but
really,
yeah, it's not.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
I don't believe you.
A lot. Look it up. Look it up in the dictionary. People always use it, and it's actually not a word. But anyways, I've got Harrison Smith as the defensive player of the year candidate, and also the player that makes the most impact for the Vikings on defense.
Yeah. I think you're probably right about Smith as far as his impact, but I think Everson Griffin is the most likely candidate for the defensive player of the year.
I'm fine with that.
I feel like sacks kind of carry more weight in that conversation, and as long as he keeps getting at least 1 per game, he's going to be in that conversation with more prevalence than the other players on that defense. But that's
also worth noting that Everson Griffin has also played very well during these primetime games as well. So he's getting that same type of exposure as Rhodes and Smith are as well. So that all said, that should be the end of the show for today. As always, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening to the show. We will have the pregame show 1 hour before game time on Sunday per standard. Hopefully we see you guys on Shindig or through Periscope or YouTube, wherever works for you guys. You can find us on VikingsTerritory.com. Always on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't already. And that's about it. So we'll see you guys for the pregame show on Sunday. We apologize for being a little bit late this week on our delivery. Both Drew and I have been sick all week, so it's been a little bit brutal trying to get this thing off on time. So we apologize for that, and hopefully we will see you guys for the pregame show on Sunday. Thanks, folks.